The documentaries, fictional stories, and poems on this channel contain mature themes including psychological horror, violence, death, self-harm, mental health crises, and other disturbing subject matter. If you're sensitive to dark content, this may not be for you. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Welcome, my immortals. I am the Howlerist, and tonight I bring you a tale ripped from the frozen earth of Rhode Island, 1892, where a family watched the consumption take them, one by one, and turned to a ritual darker than the disease itself. The worst part is, this actually happened. If you're new to the pack, subscribe and let the night in. For the rest of you, you know the ritual. Now, the ground is frozen, the shovels are ready, and the coffin is opening. This is the ashes of Eliza. Chapter 1. The ground in Hartwell had been frozen for 11 weeks when they came for my sister. I remember the sound of the shovels more than anything. That grinding, scraping protest of iron against January earth, like the town itself was trying to keep its dead where they belonged. I stood at the edge of the cemetery with my mother's shawl pulled tight around my shoulders and watched 6 men I'd known my whole life dig up Eliza's grave by lamplight. My father stood apart from me. He hadn't spoken to me in 3 days, not since Dr. Bowen had listened to my chest and stepped back with that look, the one I'd seen him give my mother, then my brother Thomas, then Eliza. The look that meant the consumption had found another marsh to feed on. I was 22. I was the last. "Almost there," called Silas Whitfield, waist deep in the hole. His breath came in white bursts, ground softer than I thought. "That's because something's been working it," muttered old Harlan Briggs, and the other men shifted on their feet, but nobody argued. It was Harlan who'd brought the idea to my father. Harlan, who could trace his family back to the old country, and who kept books in his cellar that no church would sanction. He'd sat in our parlor 3 nights before, hat in his hands, and explained it to my father while I listened from the stairs. The consumption doesn't move through a family like that by nature, Abel. 4 in 2 years? That's something else. My father had said nothing for a long time. Then, which one? The last to go, always the last. Eliza. Dead only since November, 2 months in the ground. They brought her up just after midnight. The coffin was intact, but the wood had darkened and swelled with moisture. And when Silas pried the lid with a crowbar, the sound it made was like something exhaling. I should have looked away. I didn't. Eliza looked like she was sleeping. That was the worst part. Not that she looked dead, but that she didn't. 2 months underground in a New England winter, and her cheeks still held color. Her lips were dark, almost red. Her hair, that same copper brown she'd complained about every summer, lay across her shoulder as if she'd only just arranged it. The men stepped back. One of them, I think it was Samuel Crane, made a sound in his throat like a dog that's been kicked. "Jesus Christ," Silas whispered. "You see?" Harlan said. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. 2 months dead, and she hasn't turned. The blood is still in her. still working. My father walked to the edge of the grave and looked down at his youngest daughter. I watched his face for something. Grief, horror, doubt. I saw none of it. Just a terrible, exhausted resolve. "Do what you need to do," he said. Chapter 2. They cut her open on a table in the Whitfield barn. I was not supposed to be there. My father had told me to go home to rest, that the coughing would worsen in the cold. But I followed at a distance, keeping to the tree line. I found a gap between the barn boards, where I could see everything by the light of 4 oil lamps hung from the rafters. Harlan did the cutting. He'd brought a leather roll of tools that looked older than him. Thin blades, a small saw, something curved like a fishhook. His hands had stopped shaking. Whatever terror he'd felt at the graveside had been replaced by something clinical, almost ceremonial. When he opened her chest, the barn went silent. Her heart was full of blood. Not old blood. Not the dark clotted remains you'd expect after 2 months of death. This was red. Bright, startlingly red, as if it had been circulating moments before the blade touched her. It pooled in the cavity of her chest and caught the lamplight and looked, God help me, alive. "There's your proof," Harlan said quietly. He lifted the heart free with both hands. It was heavier than it should have been. I could tell by the way his arms adjusted. "She's been feeding on your last daughter. We end this tonight." They burned Eliza's heart on a flat stone behind the barn. It took longer than you'd think. The thing seemed to resist the flame, the blood inside it hissing and spitting, like fat in a pan. The smell was something I have never been able to fully banish from my memory. Sweet and metallic and wrong, like copper pennies left in the sun. When it was finally ash, Harlan gathered the remains into a cup, mixed them with water from the well, stirred it with a wooden spoon as if he were preparing soup. Then they brought it to me. I understood, in that moment, what my father had agreed to. Not just the desecration of Eliza's body, not just the medieval horror of burning her heart in a barn at 1 a.m. He had agreed to make me drink it. "It's the only way," Harlan said. He held the cup toward me with the gentleness of a man offering communion. "The consumption follows the blood. You take the ashes and you break the chain." I looked at my father. He stood in the doorway of the barn, backlit by moonlight, his face in shadow. He did not nod. He did not speak. But he did not stop it. So I drank. It tasted like a fireplace smells the morning after, like char and something faintly mineral, faintly organic. I swallowed it in 3 long gulps and felt it settle in my stomach like a stone. The men watched me with expressions I couldn't read. Hope, maybe, or guilt, or the particular fascination humans have always had with witnessing something that should not be witnessed. Harlan took the cup back. "It's done," he said. "Go home and sleep. By morning, the cough will start to loosen." Chapter 3. The cough did not loosen. 3 days passed, then 5, then 10. Each morning, I woke hoping to feel the difference, the turning point, the moment the ashes did their work. Each morning, the blood on my pillow told me otherwise. I was getting worse. The weight was falling off me. My dresses hung like sails on a windless day. My father stopped coming to my room. Harlan came instead. He sat by my bed and asked me questions. Was I dreaming? Were there voices? Did I feel Eliza nearby? I told him no, and watched his certainty erode like a riverbank in spring. He had been so sure. The books in his cellar, the stories from the old country, the logic of blood and ash and breaking chains, it had all made such terrible sense. "Maybe we chose wrong," he said one evening, more to himself than to me. "Maybe it wasn't Eliza." "Don't," I said. "Don't you dare dig up my mother." He left without answering. The dreams started in February, not nightmares. That's what made them so unsettling. They were calm, still. I would find myself standing in the cemetery behind the church, always at night, always in snow. And Eliza would be there, not in her coffin, not risen from the grave in some gothic horror, just standing among the headstones in the blue dress she'd worn to Thomas's wedding, her copper hair loose, her feet bare in the snow. She never spoke. She only looked at me with an expression I couldn't place. Not anger, not accusation, not the hollow hunger you'd expect from the stories. It was something sadder than all of that, something like pity. And each time, just before I woke, she would raise one hand and press it flat against her own chest, against the place where her heart had been. I started to wonder if the ashes hadn't broken the chain at all. I started to wonder if they'd completed it. Chapter 4. By March, I could no longer climb the stairs. They moved my bed to the parlor, the same room where Harlan had first proposed his cure, and I lay there listening to the house settle and creak around me like a ship in a slow storm. The coughing had changed. It was deeper now, wetter, and sometimes, in the worst fits, I would taste something that wasn't quite blood, something with that same mineral sweetness I'd tasted in the cup, as if the ashes had not dissolved into me, but were working their way back out, one spasm at a time. Dr. Bowen came weekly. He listened to my lungs and said less each visit. On his last, he paused at the door and said, "I'm sorry, Ruth. I wish they hadn't done what they did. Not because it was wrong, I don't know about that, but because it gave you hope. And hope is a cruel thing to give a dying person." I wanted to tell him he was wrong. Not about the dying. I knew I was dying. I'd known it since the first spot of blood on my handkerchief. Since the first night I woke, drenched in sweat, with the feeling that something was sitting on my chest, pressing the air out of me one breath at a time. I wanted to tell him the hope wasn't the cruel part. The cruel part was that it almost worked. Because something had changed after I drank the ashes. Not my cough, not my lungs, not the slow dismantling of my body, but something else. Something I couldn't explain to Harlan or my father or Dr. Bowen, because they would have thought the fever had taken my mind. I could feel her, not as a presence, not as a ghost or a spirit, or any of the things you'd read about in Harlan's books. I could feel Eliza the way you feel your own heartbeat, constant, rhythmic, so much a part of you that you forget it's there until you stop and listen. She was in the ashes. She had always been in the ashes. And now she was in me, and I understood finally what Harlan had gotten wrong. It wasn't that Eliza had been feeding on me. It wasn't that the dead were draining the living. It was simpler and more terrible than that. The consumption didn't follow the blood. It followed the love. It moved through families not because of some supernatural parasite, but because families breathe the same air, share the same beds, press their lips to the same feverish foreheads. My mother caught it from a neighbor. Thomas caught it nursing our mother through her final months. He gave it to Eliza. Eliza gave it to me. Not through her blood, not through her buried heart. Every night I sat beside her bed, holding her hand while she coughed and told me she was getting better. And now I carried her ashes inside me like a second skeleton, and I could feel her sadness, not at being dead, but at being used, at having her body opened and her heart burned, and her remains fed to her own sister in a desperate, ignorant attempt to undo what was simply nature doing what nature does. The pity in her eyes, in the dream, I understood it now. She pitied them. She pitied all of us for believing there was a monster to blame, because the truth, that sometimes people just die, one after another, and there is no reason, no remedy, and no ritual that can stop it, was more frightening than any vampire. Chapter 5. I died on April the 14th, 1893. I know this because I was there, in a sense, and also because I have read it since. In the town records, in the newspaper clipping someone saved, in the quiet shame Hartwell carried for decades afterward. Ruth Marsh, 22, of consumption. Survived by her father, Abel Marsh. They buried me next to Eliza. My father, to his credit, insisted that no one touch my grave. He made Harlan swear it. He made the whole town swear it. Whatever they had done to his youngest daughter, they would not do to me. Harlan died the following winter, not of consumption, of a heart attack, alone in his house, surrounded by his old country books. My father sold the farm in 1895 and moved to Providence, where nobody knew his name or what had happened in his family's cemetery on that January night. He never married again. He never spoke of us. The barn where they burned Eliza's heart was torn down in 1910. The stone they used as their altar was hauled away and broken up for a wall along the Kingstown Road. If you drive that road today, you might pass it without a second thought. Just another gray stone in a gray wall in a gray New England landscape. But I want you to know something. Those ashes never left me. Not in the ground, not in the years since. Not in the slow, strange eternity of whatever this is. I carry Eliza inside me still. Her sadness and her pity, and her quiet, furious grief at what was done to her body in the name of love. And sometimes, on nights when the ground freezes hard enough to ring like iron under a shovel's blade, I think about the men who dug her up. I think about the lamplight and the crowbar and the terrible wet sound of her coffin opening. I think about my father in the doorway, choosing silence. And I think about the cup. It tasted like a fireplace smells the morning after. I have never forgotten. I will carry that taste for as long as the dead carry anything which, I am learning, is forever.